The sky was a filthy canvas of ash and crimson. Once, it had been blue. Once, birds had flown across it. Now, there were only the shrieks, those inhuman screeches that cut through the silence like a blade to skin. The air reeked of rot and old blood. Wind carried whispers, unintelligible murmurs of pain trapped in the ruins of civilization. 28 years since the rage virus tore through humanity like hellfire. And the world still hadn't recovered. Not even close. From the hollowed-out tower block overlooking the skeleton of what had once been London, Nolan Shaw adjusted his cracked gas mask and aimed his rifle through a sliver in the boarded-up window. The city was dead. But sometimes, it moved. He'd heard it yesterday. A guttural growl echoing from the underground. And last night, the scratching. Always the scratching. As if something beneath the concrete had never stopped clawing, never stopped trying to break through. Nolan wasn't alone in the high-rise. 6 survivors remained in Tower 97. They'd lived off rainwater, pigeons, and mold-covered tins of food scavenged from the remnants of broken stores. It had been 2 weeks since the last death, Amanda, who slit her own throat in the stairwell after staring too long at the infected below. She'd whispered something before she bled out. "They're changing." That had haunted Nolan. Not just the words. The way she said them, like it wasn't just an observation, but a warning. A prophecy soaked in blood. He descended the stairwell slowly, rifle slung across his back, machete in hand. Every floor reeked of mildew and the lingering stench of human waste and despair. On the 12th floor, a soft crying stopped him in his tracks. Children. But there were no children in the building. Not anymore. He clenched his teeth, forced himself to keep walking. Ghost sounds. That's what everyone called them. Echoes of a world that had burned, embedded in the very walls like scars. You either ignored them or ended up like Amanda. In the basement, Sarah and Mads waited by the metal hatch that led to the tunnels. "Bad idea," Mads muttered, scratching his beard. His skin looked grayer than usual, eyes sunken. "We shouldn't go down there. Something's moving." Sarah handed Nolan a flare. The signal came from under the city. A possible safe zone. Coordinates matched the old emergency bunker from before the fall. "It's worth checking." "Or it's a trap," Mads hissed. "Luring survivors. You know they've started mimicking us." That was a theory. Some claimed the infected were learning, mocking speech, drawing victims in by pretending to cry for help. It was dismissed as hysteria until a scavenger named Ty went missing. When they found his body, his face was contorted in frozen horror, and the message I remember had been carved into the wall in what looked like his own fingers. Still, hope was scarce currency. If there was even a sliver of a chance someone down there knew how to end this nightmare, Nolan had to try. He dropped into the hatch. The tunnel was ancient, an old maintenance shaft beneath the 2 blinds. Wet with condensation, its walls pulsed faintly, as if breathing. The deeper Nolan went, the louder the heartbeat in his ears became. Except it wasn't his heartbeat. It was, below him. He lit a flare. Its red light bathed the tunnel in sickening warmth, revealing streaks of black filth smeared across the walls. He stepped through puddles that squelched underfoot, the smell of bile and rotting meat rising with every step. And then he saw it. Dozens of corpses. Or what remained of them. Torn limbs. Jawless skulls. Eyeless sockets that still seemed to look. Not torn apart by beasts. By hands. Human hands. Scratched messages littered the walls. "We never died. The virus isn't a disease. It's a birth. Feed the mouth beneath." Nolan's hand trembled. Something was wrong, profoundly wrong. The rage virus had been raw fury, blind madness, a mindless plague. This had intention. Then, the whispers started. Not from ahead. Not from behind. Inside. A voice like rust on glass slithered into his skull. You were always coming here, Nolan. He spun, sweeping the flare across the tunnel, but he was alone. No footsteps, no signs of Mads or Sarah following. His radio hissed, then burst into garbled static. A shadow slithered across the ceiling. He fired. The flare dropped. Darkness swallowed him whole. He ran. Something chased him. It didn't growl or scream. It breathed. Wet, heavy breath, inches from his neck. He didn't look back. Not until the tunnel widened into a decaying chamber carved into the stone, a forgotten station, repurposed into a grotesque cathedral. He stopped cold. The walls were made of flesh. Human skin, stretched and nailed over steel girders. Faces sewn together in agony, eyes twitching, lips moving in silent screams. And in the center, a pit. A writhing hole of teeth, bone, and flesh. It moaned. Above it, crucified by its own entrails, was something that had once been human. Its mouth split unnaturally wide, unblinking eyes locked onto Nolan's. A whisper escaped its lips. It's not over. It's never over. We are evolving. Nolan stepped back, bile rising in his throat. Then he saw Sarah, her body dangling from a hook, jaw torn off, her intestines spilling like red vines into the pit. Mads was crawling toward it, eyes rolled back, giggling. No more hiding, he whispered. We feed it now. We feed the mouth beneath. Nolan raised his rifle and fired, once, twice, screaming as the echoes of the gunshots vanished into silence. The breathing didn't stop. It surrounded him. Hands, cold, many-fingered, wrapped around his legs. Then everything went black. He awoke in the stairwell. Back in the tower. The light outside was red, burning through the grime-covered windows. His machete was gone. His radio, smashed. Only his rifle remained. And on the wall behind him, carved deep into the concrete in jagged, bloody letters. You brought it back. He was not sure if he had screamed himself awake or if the screaming followed him back. Nolan sat hunched in a corner of the stairwell, cold sweat crawling down his neck like icy worms. The words on the wall behind him, you brought it back, still glistened as if freshly carved. He hadn't dreamt it. His hands were coated in dried blood. Not his. It smelled wrong. Sharp. Acidic. Alive. He staggered upright, legs weak, vision blurring. The building felt different now. The air heavier. The walls almost, breathing. He turned to sprint up the stairs, but every step echoed with wet, squelching sounds as though the concrete beneath him had become meat. And above, he heard a sound he hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Laughter. Tower 97 had always been quiet. The survivors had kept to themselves, their voices low, footsteps light, as if noise would wake something long sleeping. But now, laughter echoed through the halls like a virus, bouncing from wall to wall in twisted mirth. It wasn't joyful. It was mocking. When Nolan reached the 17th floor, he found the hallway lights flickering like dying fireflies. The doors to the apartments had been clawed open. Not kicked. Not smashed. Clawed. Long, vertical slashes carved deep into the metal. He passed Amanda's old unit, the blood from her suicide still staining the door like a shadow burned into time. Only now, there was something new written beneath it. We remember. Then came a dragging sound behind him. A slow scrape, like wet flesh sliding across rough floor. Nolan turned and pointed his rifle. Nothing. Only the hallway. Flickering lights. Empty silence. But the smell, rotting sweetness. A scent that coated his throat like mold. He moved quickly, checking the survivors' rooms. Gone. All of them. Sarah's room was cold and empty. No sign of her, no note, no blood. Mad's place was worse. His walls were covered in crude drawings, mouths with too many teeth, eyes with no lids, creatures wrapped in barbed wire. And on his mattress, a bundle of meat. Human meat. Still warm. Nolan stumbled out and dropped to his knees, vomiting bile and fear. The virus had always been about rage. Quick transformation. Mindless aggression. But this? This was slow. Calculated. Evolving. He grabbed his rifle and ran to the roof. If there was anything left of the outside world, any signal, he had to try. The door to the rooftop was ajar. Wind blew hard against the rusted hinges, and as he pushed it open, he was greeted not by the city skyline but by a sky of boiling red. The clouds churned as if bleeding. Smoke spiraled in reverse, and in the distance, the sun looked cracked. Something was wrong with the sky. And then he saw them. Figures. Dozens of them. Standing on rooftops across the city, still as statues. Watching. All of them turned to face him at once. He stepped back, heart hammering. Then one of them tilted its head. A grin spread across its face, jaw widening unnaturally. Too wide. Teeth like splinters jutting from bloody gums. It raised one hand. Waved. Behind him, he heard footsteps on the stairwell. He spun around. Sarah. Pale. Shaking. But alive. "Where the hell have you been?" he snapped. She looked past him toward the horizon. Her lips trembled. I saw it, Nolan. In the tunnel. I followed you, it let me see. See what? She slowly lifted her sleeve. Black veins pulsed beneath her skin. I think I'm changing. He aimed his rifle. Tell me why I shouldn't shoot you right now. She didn't flinch. Because I know what's coming. And you've already been touched. You were down there. You heard it. He didn't want to admit it, but he had. That voice, that thing, it hadn't left him. It had entered. Sarah stepped closer. The mouth isn't just a mutation. It's a threshold. The rage virus wasn't the end. It was the beginning. We were the cocoon. Nolan's stomach twisted. What do you mean? She smiled through tears. It was never about destroying us. It was about opening us. Letting something through. He backed away, trying to process her words. Then the laughter returned. Not from the city. From inside the building. Louder now. Dozens of voices. All identical. All repeating the same phrase. Open. Wide. Nolan and Sarah turned toward the stairwell. A figure stepped out. It wore Mad's face. But it wasn't Mad's anymore. Its jaw had split down the middle like a rotten fruit, and from its mouth, tiny hands emerged. Writhing. Grasping. Mad's. Nolan whispered. It grinned. Spoke with 3 voices at once. You fed us. You were first to believe. Then it screamed. Not a sound. A feeling. A wave of pressure hit Nolan's skull like an explosion, driving him to his knees. Blood poured from his nose and ears. Sarah screamed beside him. He crawled for his rifle. The creature stepped closer. Then Sarah leapt. She tackled the thing, screaming for Nolan to run. I saw what I'll become, she shrieked. Better to burn. They hit the edge of the roof and tumbled over the side together. Gone. Nolan staggered to the ledge. Their bodies lay crumpled on the concrete far below. And from the shadows of the alley, something peeled itself off the wall and dragged the corpses into the dark. He barricaded himself in the top-floor apartment, every door and window nailed shut. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. All he could do was listen. And now, the building whispered. Not just random sounds. It spoke. To him. Words carved into the glass with invisible knives. His thoughts interrupted by alien phrases. He stood in front of a cracked mirror. Looked into his own bloodshot eyes. And heard himself whisper. Open wide. Let the new world in. The nights were getting louder. Nolan sat in the dark, surrounded by salt circles and broken radios, his sanity unraveling with each passing hour. The apartment was a tomb now, no lights, no food, no hope. He hadn't slept since Sarah's death. He couldn't. The building breathed at night. The walls sweated. Whispers oozed from the sockets. Something massive moved in the plumbing, like bones dragging through wet intestines. He kept the rifle close. But even that felt useless now. You can't shoot a thought. Outside, the sky had turned completely black, not night black, but void black. No stars. No clouds. Just a suffocating vacuum, as if the universe itself had turned away. And then, as he scanned the dead city from a sliver in the boarded-up window, the impossible happened. A radio signal. His old CB radio, untouched for months, crackled to life with a screech like metal being torn from bone. Nolan jumped, knocking over a can of moldy beans. He stared at the device, his breath caught in his throat. Through the static, a voice emerged. Soft. Familiar. Nolan, if you're alive, if anyone hears this, we found it. It's not dead. It's sleeping. You have to burn it. Then silence. Then, don't trust what looks like them. It's wearing us now. It feeds on remembering. If you think about it, it grows. Don't say its name. Don't even. Static again. And then, the worst part. The voice that followed. Not human. Not right. A deep, wet, rattling voice that sounded like lungs filled with bile whispering into a dying child's throat. Too late. Nolan smashed the radio. The pieces bounced off the floor, but the static kept humming. From inside the walls now. From the sink. From his own head. He screamed, slamming his hands against his ears. Blood leaked from his nostrils. His teeth ached. A pressure had begun to grow in the back of his skull, like something pushing from the inside out. He was changing. He knew it. But there was still time. There had to be. He remembered what the voice had said. We found it. Burn it. The stairwell was worse now. Moss grew from the walls, but it wasn't green. It pulsed with black veins, like it was breathing. The walls dripped something thick and sour. The building had become flesh. Every floor he passed had changed, doors twisted into mouths, furniture rearranged into shrines made of teeth. Names carved into walls were responding, the scratched letters oozing more words beneath them. I remember. I see you. Come down. The basement. Where it all started. He had to go back. The door to the sub-basement was missing. In its place, a hole. Gaping. Breathing. The tiles around it had curled upward like charred paper, and the air smelled like meat rotting inside a microwave. He could hear the sound of crying. Not from a child. Not from a person. Something pretending. Rifle raised, he stepped in. The walls here were alive. Veined and glistening. The deeper he went, the more the stairwell began to feel like an esophagus, pulsing, damp, twitching. And then. A room. Once a boiler room, now transformed into a pulsating nest of bone, wire, and mucus. In the center, the body. Twisted. Towering. Eyes sealed shut across its face. Hands made from other hands. It breathed like a sleeping beast, slow and wet. And next to it, the source of the signal. A satellite dish. Still transmitting. He almost laughed. All this horror, and it was whispering outward. Calling something worse. Something bigger. He stepped toward the dish, every instinct in his body screaming to run. His skin prickled, his brain throbbed. But he raised the rifle, flipped on the incendiary charge, and fired. The bullet hit. Fire bloomed. The creature stirred. And then. Its eyes opened. Not just on its face. On its body. Its arms. Its tongue. All of them opened at once. And they all looked at him. He dropped the rifle and turned to run, but the hallway was gone. In its place, mouths. Mouths everywhere. Singing. A lullaby in reverse. Sleep no more. Wake and rot. Join the flesh, forget what's not. Nolan didn't remember getting out. He woke 3 floors up, alone, screaming into the moldy carpet of a stranger's apartment. His right arm was broken. His ribs bruised. Something had bitten him. But the signal was gone. The air was still. He staggered to a window. Outside, the figures were gone. The city was silent. But as he stood there, staring at the void where the skyline used to be, he heard something beneath his skin. A whisper. Thank you. He looked at his reflection in the glass. His eyes were bleeding. His teeth were longer. And something moved beneath his shirt. A ripple, like a baby kicking. But he wasn't pregnant. He was being used. Something was growing inside. He found a camera. He needed to document this. He needed someone to know. Even if he didn't survive. He spoke into it, shaking, barely able to form words. This is Nolan Crow. Tower 97. London is gone. The virus. It's not a virus. It's a gate. It's a womb. And we're what's growing inside. It wore our anger. It fed on our grief. Now it's done waiting. He coughed. Something black splattered the lens. I don't have much time. I can hear it now. In my dreams. In my bones. It wants to be remembered. Don't think about it. Don't speak of it. Don't give it a name. The light in the room flickered. A voice whispered from behind the camera. Too late. The night bled into Nolan's veins. Sleep no longer offered rest, only infection. He woke each morning shaking, the sheets soaked with black sweat, his body twitching from dreams that didn't feel like dreams. In them, he stood in a city with no sky, surrounded by towers that breathed like lungs. Every window was an eye. Every street a tongue. And something massive moved beneath the concrete, shifting in slow hunger. And the worst part? The dreams were spreading. He saw others in them, people he once knew. Neighbors. Friends. Even Sarah. They were screaming. Not words. Not pleas. Screaming like they were being woken from something far worse than death. Each morning, Nolan bled from somewhere new. Nose. Ears. Eyes. The thing inside him was awakening. He tried to leave the building. Once. The stairwell had collapsed into a pit of pulsing red membranes, wet and heaving. Beyond it, nothing. Not darkness. Nothingness. As if the world had peeled back like skin, exposing the raw cosmic bone beneath. Even the sun was fake now, an ulcerated circle that blinked like an eye made of scabs. He was trapped. But he wasn't alone anymore. The dreams were calling others to him. They came to Tower 97 one by one. The first was a man named Elliot. Or at least, he had been. Half his face was missing, but no blood leaked. Just a shimmering mist that hissed like boiling ink. He stood in the hallway outside Nolan's apartment, whispering the lullaby Nolan had first heard in the basement. Sleep no more. Wake and rot. Nolan aimed his rifle at the thing. Elliot stopped. Tilted his head like a curious dog. Then peeled back the skin of his own chest, revealing dozens of mouths where lungs should be. They all sang. Nolan fired. The body didn't fall. It squirmed away, like a spider melting into the wall, the mouth still humming as it vanished into the concrete. That was when he realized it, Tower 97 was alive. And it was pregnant. With them. With him. The second was a child. At least, it wore the shape of one. It knocked politely. Nolan, the small voice said. I'm scared. I don't know where Mommy is. Can I come in? Nolan opened the peephole and looked down. The boy had no shadow. His eyes were too wide. His smile was too tight. He remembered the voice on the radio, don't trust what looks like them. So Nolan didn't open the door. The child grew silent. Then began scraping something into the wood. Nolan watched, frozen in place as the boy carved a symbol into the frame with a sharpened tooth. A spiral made of writhing limbs. And as the child walked away, backwards, eyes never blinking, the door began to breathe. On the sixth night, Nolan tried to cut it out of himself. He took a knife to his stomach, dug deep into the meat, searching for the lump that had begun to move when he slept. Screaming through gritted teeth, he tore flesh, pulled sinew, opened what he thought was a cocoon. What came out wasn't human. A small, wet thing, gray and eyeless, crawled from the wound, clicked once, and vanished into the vent. He didn't bleed. He should have died. Instead, he healed. But wrong. The next morning, his shadow didn't move when he did. By week 2, the world outside was unrecognizable. Tower 97 now stood on a cliff of twitching meat, surrounded by water that looked like coagulated blood. The skyline bent in impossible ways. Buildings leaned into each other like lovers made of bone and iron. The clouds were mouths. The wind whispered names he hadn't spoken in years. He saw Sarah. She stood across the void one morning, on the roof of the opposite tower. Naked. Skin peeled back. Eyes full of stars. She opened her mouth, and 100 voices screamed from it. Then she jumped. Nolan watched her fall, but she never hit the ground. She just hung there, suspended in midair like a marionette cut from its strings, slowly unraveling into tendrils of flesh that reached upward. They waved at him. The dreams had become prophecies. They showed him a heart buried beneath the city. A massive, ancient heart, not metaphorical, but real, beating once every 10 hours. Each pulse reshaped reality. Each beat infected new minds. It didn't want Earth. It wanted us. As vessels. As wombs. And Nolan? He was a high priest now. Chosen. Anointed. He knew at the moment the voices stopped whispering and started obeying. The building listened when he spoke. The shadows moved to protect him. The child returned, and bowed. The walls no longer bled when he touched them. They purred. One final dream changed everything. He stood in a hallway that had no end. Doors on either side. Screams behind each one. He opened one and saw himself, before the infection. Before the loneliness. Before Sarah's death. Happy. Human. He reached out to touch his past self. And the moment he did, the entire hallway collapsed. He woke screaming, but with knowledge. The entity didn't destroy. It rewrote. Every infection was a footnote. Every dream a seed. It wasn't here to kill us. It was here to replace us. He recorded one final video. His skin sagged. His voice rasped. His left eye was now entirely black, pulsing like a bloated tick. This is Nolan Crow. If you find this, it's too late. But maybe you'll understand. Maybe you'll know what not to do. He looked into the camera, lips trembling. They called it the hunger. That's what we named the signal 28 years ago. We thought we killed it. Burned the last source. Buried the labs. But, it waited. Burrowed beneath us. Grew teeth. Learned to mimic. It doesn't need air. Or food. It needs only memory. He leaned closer. And you're feeding it. Right now. Just by hearing this. He smiled. Welcome to the womb. The screen went black. A humming began. And somewhere, far from Tower 97. Another screen flickered on. Another dream began. Another person remembered. And the hunger. Smiled. There was no sky anymore. Just a gaping membrane stretched above Tower 97, like a second skin pulled tight over the world. The clouds were long gone, now replaced by shifting, translucent veins pulsating with a lightless ichor. The sun had become a slit in the sky that wept pus instead of light. And Nolan Crow had stopped feeling human. His skin itched like it didn't belong to him anymore, like it was trying to peel itself off. His teeth had become soft. His tongue forked during the night, split down the center like it was remembering another shape. But worst of all, he could hear the tower speaking to him. Not in words. In memory. Every wall remembered. Every floor, every door, every cracked tile whispered the lives of the people who had once existed here. Except now, they didn't exist anymore. Not really. The hunger had digested them. And the building kept them alive. Nolan wandered the halls like a priest in a rotting temple. He passed an apartment whose walls were covered in flesh. Human wallpaper that pulsed like it was breathing. Faces stretched from beneath it, moaning soundlessly. He recognized one. Mrs. Haverly. A sweet old woman who had once baked cookies for the building's kids. Now her eyes blinked from beneath the skin of her own living room wall. She was part of the archive now. Next door, apartment 412 had collapsed entirely, replaced by a spiral staircase that went down much farther than any basement should. The air that rose from its depths was warm and moaned with each step Nolan took toward it. He didn't descend. Not yet. The tower had become a library of flesh. Each apartment was a different chapter in a story the hunger had written. He passed a room where the ceiling dripped milk-white pus that formed words across the tiles, every womb is a portal. He passed another where the air was heavy with sobbing, though no one could be seen. Only furniture. Shifting subtly. Chairs twitching like insects. Tables that bled when touched. In room 509, a man was fused to the ceiling, his spine grown into the beams above, mouth slack, eyes spinning like clocks. He whispered in reverse. Nolan listened closely. The voice said his name. The archive wasn't just memory. It was a trap. Each room Nolan entered, he remembered things that weren't his own. He relived moments from other minds, felt their joys and griefs and deaths. The further he went, the more fragmented he became, his own identity bleeding into the others. At some point, he stopped recognizing his own voice. When he spoke, the echo didn't match. It was apartment 606 that nearly broke him. He opened the door and saw a mirror. Not an object, a room-sized mirror that reflected not the hallway, but a version of himself before the infection. Clean. Healthy. Eyes clear. Beard trimmed. Then the reflection looked up and smiled. and stepped forward. Out of the mirror. No glass. No transition. The other Nolan stood in the room with him. It held out its hand. "You don't have to remember," it whispered. Nolan backed away. The mirror behind the doppelganger rippled, and hundreds of other versions stepped forward. Some were corpses. Some were beasts. Some were nothing but mouths. "You're just a draft," they said in unison. Then they lunged. Nolan woke up inside a wall. Literally. The tower had absorbed him during the assault. Flesh and cement held him tight, suspended between nerve and wire, eyes staring through a semi-transparent patch of drywall. He couldn't scream, his jaw was locked open, a tube growing from his throat into the wall's artery-like tunnels. He had become part of the building. For 66 hours, he listened. And the building showed him everything. The truth. The source. The origin of the hunger. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a signal. It was a dream. A dream humanity had buried in its collective subconscious. A repressed thought so ancient and foul that it predated speech, something older than DNA. A thing we'd locked away for survival. A memory of what came before us. But something, 28 years ago, had unlocked it. A science experiment trying to decode the architecture of the human soul had tapped into it. Accidentally. And they'd let it in. It didn't come from space. It came from below. Buried not in the earth, but in our cells. We carried it. We birthed it. And now it was waking up. Nolan escaped the wall by shedding himself. Layer by layer. The flesh that crawled free wasn't the man who'd entered the building weeks ago. He was taller. Thinner. Joints bending wrong. His mouth no longer closed, lips split into mandibles that clicked softly when he spoke to the walls. The building obeyed now. He was the archive. He made his way to the basement. But it was no longer a basement. It was a cathedral. A biomechanical chamber of bone and rebar, filled with thrumming chords of muscle and gristle. The pipes had become arteries. The foundation had grown teeth. At the center. A pulsing egg. 12 feet tall. Covered in thousands of human eyes, each one crying blood. It was the heart of the hunger. And it was pregnant. Inside it, a face. His. And Sarah's. Twisted into one. Nolan collapsed before it. He wept. Not out of sorrow. But awe. For the first time, he understood, this wasn't destruction. It was Genesis. A new species was being written. Not from scratch, but from memory. Mankind was merely a first draft. A crude prototype. What was coming next would not be human. It would be perfect. It would be the remembered. And it would rise. Soon. The tower was silent now. Not the silence of absence. The silence of listening. Everything had gone still. Every pipe had ceased its moaning. The floors had stopped shifting. The walls no longer whispered. Not because the horror had ended. But because it was beginning. The egg had opened. And the remembered had been born. It emerged without sound. No scream. No cry. Just the splitting of tissue, the wet peel of fibrous membranes parting like the pages of an ancient book bound in human skin. What slid out was not a child. It had no gender, no clear form, an ever-changing sculpture of exposed tendons and bone that blinked with thousands of borrowed eyes. Its skin, if you could call it that, was translucent and shimmering, like oil on water. Faces rippled across it, mouths murmuring words in every language ever spoken. Nolan fell to his knees. Not in fear. In reverence. He wept again, but this time not from awe. This time, it was joy. He had waited 28 years for this. The remembered reached toward him. Not with hands, but with thoughts. His mind tore wide open. Every locked door in his memory burst apart. Every painful moment, every secret he'd buried deep, ripped free and held up like ornaments. And he saw it wasn't just his memories. It had all of them. Everyone. Every person consumed. Everyone archived by the flesh tower, by the hunger, was now stitched into its being. Their lives were not lost. They were resurrected. But not as they were. As something better. Stronger. Endless. The city beyond Tower 97 was gone. The world Nolan had once known had collapsed into ruin. Entire regions had been reshaped into organic structures, flesh bridges, bone towers, lung forests that exhaled plague. Cities were no longer cities. They were organs in a new, planetary body. A corpse being remade. The air itself was no longer air. It breathed. The hunger was not content with Earth. It reached beyond. To the sleeping stars. And the remembered were its messengers. From the cathedral's heart, a call went out. Not a sound, but a pulse. A throb of reality, bending the laws of what should be. A ripple that reached into the soil and sky, into the minds of every infected host, every carrier who thought themselves immune, every survivor still clinging to the illusion of individuality. And they began to change. Some dropped to the ground and shed their flesh like clothing. Others screamed until their throats ruptured and grew new mouths. Whole neighborhoods dissolved into rivers of cells, gathering into monstrous amalgamations that crawled back toward the tower, howling devotion. The remembered were no longer just born. They were assembled. Nolan walked outside. The sky had ruptured. It was no longer a sky. It was a lid. A membrane. The world had become a womb. Thunder cracked, but it wasn't thunder. It was laughter. Gigantic, divine, terrifying laughter from the thing outside the world. Something was knocking. Trying to get in. And the remembered were building it a door. Across the horizon, monuments were rising. Mile-high effigies sculpted from human biomass, bones twisted into antennae that reached into space. Cities joined them, folding in on themselves like origami, their inhabitants becoming fuel, forming messages the stars could read. The earth was being rewritten. Not erased. Rewritten. A final, perfect edition of the failed experiment called humanity. And not everyone resisted. Some survivors welcomed it. Worshipped it. In the burned-out skeleton of Chicago, a congregation of new cults gathered in the ribcage of a fallen skyscraper. They sang without mouths. They burned offerings of memory, diaries, photo albums, teeth of their loved ones. They begged to be taken, to be remembered. And their prayers were answered. A remembered one descended upon them. It didn't kill them. It opened them. And inside each was a seed. Nolan wandered through what was left of a forest. The trees had eyes. The ground was wet with mucus and fingers that reached up from the soil like sprouting roots. A deer approached him. It blinked. Then split down the center. And from inside, a small child stepped out. Naked. Genderless. Smiling. Its eyes were spinning spirals of DNA. "Do you remember who you were?" it asked him. Nolan knelt before the child. "No," he said, trembling. "And I don't want to." The child touched his forehead. And Nolan remembered everything. The day he was born. The day he first bled. The sound his mother made the first time she screamed in her sleep. The taste of copper when his father beat him. The moment he first realized he was already broken. The second he saw Sarah in the hospital, grinning, half-eaten, and still alive. The year the world died. And the voice of the hunger, whispering. "This is not the end. The child took his hand and led him to a black pit. In the pit, stars. Not of the sky. But of another place. The place before this place. The source of the dream. And the child said, "Jump." Nolan did. And what he saw wasn't hell. It wasn't heaven. It was the truth. We were never meant to last. We were never meant to be final. We were scaffolding. A genetic bridge to something greater. The cocoon before the moth. The scream before the word. And now that word had been spoken. And that word was. Remember. Nolan emerged from the pit reborn. Not human. Not monster. But the first scribe of the new flesh. His body a language. His thoughts scripture. His mouth a pen. He would write the new world into being. And the stars were watching. And they were hungry. They thought the world ended 28 years ago. They were wrong. That was just the prologue. Now, the real story begins. The sky peeled back like a scab. The stars blinked in synchrony, red, pulsing, infected with the rhythm of something old. Something vast. Something awake. The remembered, now legion, stood across the continent, humanoid only in silhouette. Each being a cathedral of pain, their bodies pulsing with organic circuitry, bones intertwined with memory, faces shifting across their skin like television static trapped in flesh. They did not speak. They resonated. Through them, a voice hummed across the land, deafening, beautiful, filled with meaning that shattered minds. A frequency not made of sound but of memory, of remembrance. Those who heard it dropped to their knees, their skulls vibrating until their pasts spilled out of their eyes like molasses. You could not hide from what you once were. Not anymore. The earth itself began to move. Not tectonic. Not natural. The continents pulsed, veins surfacing beneath deserts. Oceans throbbed, their currents reversing, boiling with embryonic masses. Mountains opened like lungs. Every tree, every animal, every microbe had become part of the gestalt. There was no more ecosystem. Only an organ system, and it had started to beat. Nolan stood on the summit of what was once Denver. It was no longer a city. It was a throat. A black pit spiraling into the core of the earth, lined with teeth and tumors. Screams echoed upward, not of pain, but transformation. Birth and death had become the same thing. He was no longer Nolan. He had become the scribe. His flesh was covered in pulsating script, bioluminescent runes etched by a force beyond time. His bones clicked with every step, rearranging to better suit his new purpose. He no longer remembered who he had been, only what he must now write. The New Testament of the remembered. And it would begin with fire. The stars above shifted. One blinked out. Then another. Not because they had died. But because something was in front of them. A shape, unfathomably massive, descended from beyond the atmosphere. It wasn't a ship. It was a god. Not a god of love. Not even a god of death. A god of remembrance. Its body was a galaxy of bones. Its eyes were made of dying suns. Its fingers reached down into the earth, not to destroy, but to harvest. To collect what the earth had grown. For this was never a plague. This was farming. People still hiding underground in the last bunkers, doomsday cults, militarized survivors, forgotten scientists, watched their instruments fail. The air turned sour. The walls bled. And then, one by one, they were seen. The remembered reached into their shelters with arms that passed through metal and stone, caressing them with hands made of regrets and unspoken truths. There was no place to hide from yourself. They were not killed. They were unfolded. Like paper cranes soaked in blood. Their bodies unraveled into spirals of thought, reabsorbed into the lattice of the Gestalt. Their screams became verses. And above it all, the mouth opened. It stretched across the sky from horizon to horizon, lips made of planetary rings, teeth the size of cities. Its tongue was a spiral galaxy, flickering with decaying light. And it spoke. "It is time to become." Nolan felt the words etch themselves into the sky. He raised his arms. And from him, the final script was written across the heavens, using storms as ink, lightning as punctuation. He described the end. And in describing it, he finalized it. The process was not instant. Becoming takes time. Humanity, what was left, was liquefied into essence. Cities became ideas. DNA became prayers. The moon cracked, spilling blood and teeth. The atmosphere turned transparent, revealing the true architecture of reality beneath, the scaffolding of a forgotten dreamer who had died 1,000,000,000 years ago but whose body still remembered. And Earth was no longer a planet. It was a sentence. The remembered gathered in orbit, forming a circle around the now wailing planet. Their arms linked. Their eyes glowing. From the mouth above, a tongue descended, longer than oceans, thicker than continents. It touched the earth. And Earth sighed. Not in pain. In acceptance. What happened next cannot be described with language. Only sensation. Imagine your mother's scream the moment you were born. Now imagine it in reverse, played backward through a void of infinite loss, echoing across dimensions. That's what the end felt like. The planet shattered, not into pieces, but into moments. Time itself split open. Past, present, future bled into each other. Dinosaurs walked the ruins of London. Future machines slithered through the veins of pharaohs. The first cave paintings wept blood as they sang of skyscrapers. Everything that ever happened. Remembered. And with that remembrance, it all ended. Nolan stood in the void. No earth. No sky. Only the mouth. The remembered stood behind him. Countless. Beautiful. Horrifying. Nolan stepped forward. "Did we succeed?" he asked. The mouth pulsed. And spoke. "There was never failure. You were the coconut. We were the knife. Now, drink." Nolan opened his mouth. The void poured in. All of it. The hunger. The stars. The truth. And in that final moment, Nolan realized the most horrifying thing of all. They were still evolving. Even this wasn't the end. It was just the birth canal for something else. Something worse. Something unimaginable. Something that would not just infect one planet, but all of them. Every world. Every galaxy. Every universe. And far across the dark, cold infinite. A second mouth opened. Waiting. Smiling. END. Drop of blood. 28 years later. Drop of blood.